Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces. So this week's question is a very simple one, but has an interesting history. So Carl asks, some publications refer to us as advisors, spelled with an ER at the end. Most advisors I know spell it advisor with an OR at the end. So is one more proper than the other? What's basically Carl's question? What's the difference between financial advisor and financial advisor? So this is an interesting question because there are a few different ways to answer depending whether we're talking about technical, different dictionary grammar definition or regulatory definitions, because some of these terms are actually enshrined in regulation. So if you look up advisor, frankly spelled either way, advisor with an ER or advisor with an OR, in the dictionary, you basically get a definition, someone who advises, like a person who engages in the act of advising, which is giving a recommendation or a suggestion. So notably, the root there, an advisor is someone who advises. Advise is spelled with an E at the end, right? Like the word is not adviso, it's advise. And so the natural noun version becomes advisor with an ER at the end. Apparently, if you actually look it up on Merriam-Webster, the original etymology, the word comes from a French word, advisor, A-V-I-S-E-R, the root of which is opinion, the word opinion. Sorry if I'm butchering the French language there. But advisor in French became advisor, or the act of advising in the British English, which became an advisor, where we simply took the word advise and added an R onto the end. And so when you actually look historically at the use of the word advisor, it was all spelled advisor with an ER. The OR definition, or the OR spelling, really didn't appear until about the past 100 years or so. And frankly, not really entirely clear why. So certainly we see lots of differences in words that are spelled sort of British Old English style versus how we spell it in the U.S. So they spell theater with an R-E at the end. We spell it with an E-R. We write the words color and honor with an O-R. They spell it with an O-U-R. And then you get a couple of words that are spelled ER in British English and spelled OR in American English, of which advisor appears to be part of that trend. Now, I suspect actually the other reason why we've seen a shift is, so one of the distinctions that we do make in just the words, advisor, or I should say to advise is the verb of giving someone recommendations and suggestions. Advice is the noun. And so we actually have different spellings between the act of advising and this thing we call advice. And so I suspect much of the growth of the OR version of advisor was trying to make the same distinction. Like an advisor with an ER was simply an informal term for a person who advises. Advisor with an OR was the more formal, job title version to describe an advisor person. And actually, when you look in most industries outside of financial advising, advisor with an OR is often what gets used in a formal job title, like a formal term, is the OR version. Now, for financial advisors, there's an additional significance to this distinction. It's regulation. It's the fact that those of us who are not just advisors, but registered investment advisors, under the legal definition, we are regulated by the Investment Advisors Act of 1940. Now, the Advisors Act of 1940 came in the aftermath of the crash of 1929, the Great Depression. It was essentially created to be a crackdown on much of the investment advising abuses that happened during the booming 1920s. We created a distinction between salespeople who were brokers and those who actually really formally gave ongoing investment advice for compensation. So they advised on investments, which meant they were advisors with the ER definition. And actually, if you look historically at the use of the word advisor with an ER, it had a massive spike in historical use in the 1920s, driven by this kind of boom of investment advising, including an abuse of the term, which is why the Investment Advisors Act of 1940 cracked down on advisors. That was kind of the whole point of it. So now we have this ER version of advisor enshrined in regulation because back in the 1930s, 20s, 30s, and 40s when the regulation was happening, that was the dominant label. It was all spelled with an ER. And so we end up with this strange distinction where advisor with an OR kind of became the formal the formal label for advisors, but advisor with an ER is actually what it says in the regulation. So if you use the acronym RIA for Registered Investment Advisor, that is advisor with an ER at the end because that's actually how it's written in the law itself. Now, it's worth noting in terms of registering as an investment advisor or being subject to the legal standards of an investment advisor, it doesn't actually matter whether you call yourself advisor with an OR or advisor with an ER. Requirements to register as an investment advisor is actually based ultimately on what you do, what you are engaged in. If you are engaged in the business of providing ongoing investment advice for compensation, you have to register as an investment advisor. So there's 3 parts to that test. You have to be providing investment advice as a business for compensation. If you do all 3 of those, you have to register as an investment advisor. What you write on your business card and which label you use is up to you. So it's not as though you can avoid registering as investment advisor or fiduciary obligation to your clients because you call yourself an OR advisor instead of an ER advisor. Nonetheless, if you're talking about the Investment Advisors Act, being a registered investment advisor, being an investment advisor representative of the firm, so an IAR of the RIA, in all of those contexts, the proper use is ER, because that's literally what the law says, at least if you spell it out. Obviously, if you're just writing RIA or IAR, and you're not spelling it out, no one knows which version of advisor you're using, and it doesn't really matter. But if you're writing it out, if you're explaining those terms, if you're putting them in print, ER really is actually the legally proper and accurate definition. So in the end, what do you use this ER versus OR? Well, if you're using it, at least in writing, I think you have to recognize the context. So that's why when you read articles in Nerd's Eye View, you'll actually see me use both the OR and the ER. It's not because I'm having like a crazy multiple personality day. It's because I use OR to describe the general label of financial advisors. I use ER anytime we're talking about investment advisors legally registered as such, or the Investment Advisors Act, or being an RIA, because that's the actual legal definition and legal term. And frankly, I think what that means is anytime you're writing out those legal terms, those regulatory terms, whether that's on your business card or your website or your email signature or whatever, if you're writing out registered investment advisor or investment advisor representative, it should be the ER. That's the actual accurate definition of those titles. Now, if you're just trying to set your job title, frankly, you can make it whatever you want. Again, regulators are going to judge you based on what you do, not based on what you call yourself. Whether you're calling yourself advisor with an OR, advisor with an ER, financial consultant, or any of the other, numerous plethora of titles we give ourselves in the industry, the SEC, to the extent, frankly, that they enforce the line between advisors and salespeople at all, which they're not great at, but to the extent they do, it's really not driven very much by which spelling version of advisor you use on your business card. It's about what you're doing, whether you hold out as being a person who gives advice for compensation. So, right, frankly, at least in business use, this is mostly a matter of preference. Now, given, frankly, the kind of the old English connotation of advisor with an ER, I think actually in our industry, spelling advisor with an ER now is the more formal version, because the OR version is kind of the common standard use. So, I guess if you're trying to convey something more formal, maybe you've got more formal, older clientele, they might actually appreciate the ER version. It's kind of a subtle twist on your brand that just helps to convey that kind of sense. But to get back to Carl's original question of, are you supposed to use OR versus ER, aside from some acknowledgement that anytime you're talking about an RIA or an IAR or the Investment Advisors Act, you really should use the ER spelling because that's literally what the law says. Beyond that, it's really up to you, frankly, whether you use the OR advisor, the ER advisor, or financial planner or financial consultant or some other label. Regulators will judge you by what you do, not merely how you hold out. But I think it does imply some difference in your brand and marketing. So that's a fair consideration of just what does that term mean to you? What do you think that term means to your clients? And is there a distinction that you want to convey? So I hope that helps a little. Some food for thought around the difference between financial advisor versus financial advisor. This is Office Hours with Michael Kitces, 1 p.m. East Coast time on Tuesdays. Hope you've enjoyed for today and have a great day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.